At the age of 59, I wasn't looking or feeling my best. I had low energy. I was tired all the time, and I was losing muscle, gaining fat, and what I had done in the past for my diet and exercise were no longer serving me. I wanted to do better for myself and started doing some research and landed on the Faster Way. This science-based nutrition and fitness program is like no other. It includes both food guidance and daily workouts that are tailored to fit your goals, and it's perfect for midlife women. I'm excited to start working with clients and introduce you to a sustainable, healthy lifestyle that can lay the foundation for this next phase of life. Are you ready to prioritize you? Check the show notes of this episode and let's connect. Now, on to the show. Health, wellness, fitness, and everything in between. We're removing the taboo from what really matters in midlife. I'm your host, Michelle Folan, and this is Asking for a Friend. Believe it or not, there are up to 10,000 cults in existence in the United States today. There are no state or federal laws that prohibit cults, and sociologists and researchers now prefer to term them New Religious Movement, or NRM. I've been wanting to cover this topic for a while, and when I started following our next guest on Instagram, I had no idea she was also a cult survivor. Shannon Payton, also known as Shanny Pants, is a content creator, podcaster, and realtor, and I have no idea where she finds the time to do all that, but she has created many viral moments on social media where she shares her makeup tutorial parodies and self-deprecating humor. Her podcast, The Shanny Pants Show, gives Shannon a platform to share her struggles growing up in a cult and other aspects of her adult life. And she is truly hilarious. Welcome to Asking for a Friend, Shannon Payton.
Thank you so much. I'm very, very excited to be here.
Thank you for being here and very nice to meet you. Where are you living now? And tell me a little bit about your family.
Yes. So I live about 20 minutes east of Sacramento. Everyone knows where Sacramento is, so I just use that as a point. California. I have 3 children. Let's see, they're 10, 12, and 16. And a husband and a dog and a cat. And, just the busy life of having kiddos this age. It's every day. It's like, wow, we made it through another day. Yay, look at us. So it's craziness, but it's also a lot of fun.
Yeah. And you have a big girl job in addition to your more creative outlet. So
yeah, I sure do.
We'll get into that.
Right.
But let's get to the meat of this, because you did grow up in a cult. Can you share more about this group? Is it religious? What were they about?
Yes, it was definitely a religious cult. It started with my grandparents' generation, and it started, I think, innocently enough with like Bible studies in home. They kind of wanted to separate themselves from denominations. So I think it kind of started as a, pretty innocent thing. And then from what I understand, it sounds like in the early 80s, the person who took over and was in charge the entire time I was there kind of got on a power trip and started making a lot of changes and enforcing a lot of rules. And as things like this go, everyone just kind of followed along, and it turned into, a big movement of people kind of across the United States. And I think we had a group in Canada and Mexico and and Peru, actually. I forgot about Peru. So it kind of ended up spreading, there was a pretty wide range of, we called them assemblies. So each little group was called an assembly. And so we were in the Sacramento assembly. And my parents were both born into it. And so they married in it. I was born in 81 and lived my life in it. I have 2 sisters. One was 18 months younger than me, or is, and then baby sister is 9 years younger than me. So, we always tease her that she's like kind of like an only child because she was spoiled rotten and didn't get all the rules quite as tough as me and my other sisters. So
The crap.
yeah, we're like, by the way, you are welcome for us doing all this other stuff for you. So you got the cool life. I always tell her, like, Dunkaroos. I don't know if you know what Dunkaroos are, but we're like, you got Dunkaroos. We never got Dunkaroos. You were the one that got Dunkaroos. That's how spoiled you were. So that's like our gauge of how spoiled she is. But yeah, so I lived my whole life in it. And as far as like, it definitely was religious based. One of the main things about it is we were the right way and everyone else was wrong, which is very typical in any cultic group. And so churches were bad, churches were wrong. So we didn't use a lot of church lingo, like we wouldn't even call a pastor. It was the speaker, and then the leaders. Yeah. So it was like we really, really did not use any church, very little church type lingo, which is weird, because it's such a religious thing. So it was, kind of growing up in that environment it was really, really challenging. And especially for girls and women, which again is kind of one of those typical things in a lot of the religious type cults. And so it was very, very confusing, I would say. Like when I look back on my childhood, I just like, that's the word that just to me wraps it all up. It's very confusing. We believed in marking, which was like excommunication. So we called it marking to be avoided. And what that was is if someone, disagreed or argued or did something that was, deemed inappropriate, they would be marked to be avoided. So if you saw them at the store, you don't make eye contact, you don't look at them, you walk the other direction. It was like, for sure, just you are not in contact with this person at all. And when I was about 6, one of my dad's sisters married his best friend, and they were a part of our group. And so I grew up with those cousins, and when I was about 6, their family got marked. And so it went from like being best friends, one of them is right at my age, to all of a sudden not seeing him at 6 years old. Oh. And like I have memories of like laying in bed praying that they would get right so that they could come back. Because that's how we did for everyone. They were very wrong, of course, and we were very worried for them. And so I just can remember as a child being so worried for their souls, basically. Like, I don't know what they did, but obviously it was wrong. And so that was like, I feel like my first memories of that confusion, where it was just like,
right.
How, like, why, why is this that way?
So now looking back, do you know now why they were marked?
Yes. They basically were standing up to leadership and questioning, very simple questionings like clothing, how we had to dress, very simple things, but they weren't backing down with it. It ended up being a group of, I don't even know, but a pretty large chunk that were all marked at one time. And so, yeah, it was literally over like, we want to wear pants and we're saying no. So it was stupid, really looking back, it's funny how ridiculous it is that like, oh, I lost out pretty much my entire childhood with like 3 of my best cousins, and it's just gone. And you can't make that up. And I think I feel so bad for my parents because they were so close and they lost their best friends, because someone says you're not allowed to talk to them. So the markings divided so many families, so many families. It was just like looking back, so disgusting. It's just so sad.
So at the peak of this cult, how many people were in it in your particular sect?
Yeah, in our assembly, we had about 100 to 150 people in our, kind of maybe at our peak there. And then I would say each assembly across the United States was around that size. The Texas assembly was much bigger. They were probably more like 500. But yeah, so we were about 150. And that was our world. These 100 people are your friends, your life, the only people you really hang out with. That was it.
Did they school you too, or did you go to a public school?
So we were privileged enough because my parents were very rebellious. We went to a public school, and grew up in a tiny little town. And so we went to the same school from K to 8th, and then high school with basically all the same kids. So that was nice. Most of the families were homeschooled that I grew up with. And, I think good and bad for the experience of being in public school, because it was good in the fact that it was our only really outside experience with the world versus our little group. But it also, opened us up to, we had to dress real special. So we had to have like long skirts, no tank tops, no piercings. Well, of course, as a kid, that doesn't matter too much, but no tattoos. We couldn't cut our hair. So we had really, really long hair. We definitely, stood out in a public school setting. So it opened us up to a lot of bullying. And, so I have a lot of traumatic experiences in public school. But at the same time, I'm thankful because I look at most of the kids that I was raised with that were homeschooled, and I'm like, yeah, I think even though I endured a lot, like as a kid that I hate, I think it was still worth it that we went to public school.
Yeah, I can't even imagine how you would have felt so different. Mm-hmm. First of all, you're in a cult. Did the other kids know that you were in this cult? Did no one talk about it?
So, like, kids at school, is that what you mean? Yes. Mm-hmm. So, like, they were very confused, and they would always ask, like, why can't you wear pants? Why can't you wear shorts? And I didn't really know because it never made sense to me. But we always said it was like a modesty thing, like we have to be very modest. And so I would just say that, and then kind of I got to the point where I was just like, oh, it's because of the group that I'm in. And so they'd be like, your church, and I'm like, finally started being like, yeah, I guess. Like, yeah, my church group. Yeah, that's why. This is what we believe. And so the kids, they needed like a name because we had no name. We had no name on our church or at our group. And so they called my kids that I grew up with in elementary school started saying, oh, well, you're a new Christian. We'll just call you a new Christian. So that's what they all called me, is just like, she's a new Christian. She's definitely not like a normal Christian, but she's a new one. This is a new thing. So it was funny because it kind of got deemed as anyone from our group that did go to public school, they just assumed, oh, yep, they're a new Christian. So yes. Okay. Yeah.
And then during this time, was anybody in your immediate family marked? Did you lose contact with anybody in your family?
Well, besides my cousins and aunt and uncle, my sister, who's 18 months younger than me, this was when we were older, we got married really young because that's what you did. You met someone when you're 10 and kind of figure, oh, I'll probably marry that one. And so we were married really young, and when they had been married probably like, I don't know, a couple of years, they left. So they were never officially marked because I don't think anyone could find a good enough reason to mark them because like they never argued or bothered anyone. They just left. But we didn't have contact with her because it was very frowned upon. And she lived like literally a mile from me. And we were really close. That was very, very hard. And then looking back during those times, she got really sick. She almost died. She was in the hospital. And
oh gosh,
I know. So that was like, I went to the hospital and it was like the first time I had seen her in a long time. And I remember looking back, like I was very judgmental, which is how we were raised to be about every decision basically that she was choosing in life because it was different than what we grew up with and it was different than what we deemed right. So that is like probably one of the most painful things I carry from that experience is just like how sad our relationship was for several years. You know, again, you can't get that time back. And I was not nice to her. I was very judgmental and it's really sad.
When you talk about you knew early in life who you were probably going to marry, I mean, I hate to say this, but it had to be kind of slim pickings. If you were in such, and that's a relatively small group of people, how did you meet your husband?
Yes. So we basically did marry anyone in our group. But what we would do, we weren't allowed to celebrate any holidays. So during holidays, twice a year, our big camps, we called like whenever we get together at a different place besides like our Grange Hall, it was a camp. So we would have December during Christmas and July during 4th of July, we would have camps, big ones. And for anyone from California, you'll know where this is. Very near Fresno, California. It's like farm town, smells like cows all the time. We would rent their fairgrounds for our camp. So we would literally rent an entire fairground, and assemblies from all over the country would come. So there was probably, like 1,000 people at this. So that's where you would like twice a year get to see your friend from Texas or your friend from Virginia. So those were kind of our like, meat market type situations where it was like, okay, tag.
Speed dating.
Yes, it really was. Yes. And that's what it was. Like truly like all the teens were like checking people out and like, okay, well, that one's still available. But for me, wow. Yeah, it was really special. For me, my husband, because we are all so connected, my husband's grandparents and my grandparents were friends. And my parents and his parents grew up knowing each other. And then when he was in 6th grade, they lived in California, but they were in the San Luis Obispo Assembly. So when he was in 6th grade, they moved to the Sacramento Assembly. So I pretty much knew him well from 6th grade on. When I was 12, I knew I was going to marry him. So that was kind of like when it's just like, and that was always really fun to just explain to people at school too. So like, you say you have a boyfriend, like we never see him. We don't know who he is. And because we didn't do any activities at school, like no extracurricular activities. We never did like t-ball, soccer. We weren't allowed to do anything. So they always would like not make fun of me, but like joke around like, I don't think he really exists. Like, that's kind of weird. I don't think he exists. But yeah, so at 12 years old, knew I was going to marry him, and that was it. But yes, very slim picking.
Yeah.
And a lot, for me, I feel like we were kind of fortunate because we did grow up for the most part in the same assembly. So we saw each other, at least 3 times a week. And it's not like we never dated or anything. You just saw them at meetings and that's what you did. But for a lot of people, a lot of my friends, they would have long distance relationships with someone like in Texas, and you would talk on the phone a little bit. It wasn't like now with cell phones or anything. And then you would marry them. Like you did not know the person you were marrying. It was very strange. I mean, maybe you meet him 2 or 3 times in person and then you're married. So I feel pretty fortunate I didn't have to do that. But yeah, pretty bad.
And so there was no extracurricular activities at school. So no like Girl Scouts, sports.
Oh, no.
So the guys didn't get to participate in any sports or anything.
No. And that was like my husband, I mean, he doesn't still have hang-ups about it, but that's like one of the things he can get really worked up over because him and his brothers were all so athletic and should have been playing so many different sports, and they weren't allowed to. And yeah, it's really sad. So it's fun now having kids and like, yeah, sure. What sport do you want to do this week? Let's do them all.
Let's do them all. Let's overcommit.
Right. Yay. That's just right up my alley.
Yeah. So how old were you then when you got married?
I was 19 when we got married. A lot of my friends were like 17, 18. So we were kind of waited a little while. I graduated high school and then we waited a full year, which was not very normal, before we got married. And so I was 19 and he turned 21 like a couple weeks after we got married. So yeah, babies.
Yeah, that is really young.
Uh-huh.
I was 26 when I got married the first time. And
Much better.
I thought that was young.
Right. Mm-hmm. It is. Like now I'm like, oh, I hope my kids just wait till they're 30.
Yeah, exactly. Wait, no, don't rush into it. Is the cult still around?
Yes. So what kind of happened when we got out, I'll kind of start there if that's okay, because that kind of explains what's left. But I got out when I was 31 years old. So I lived my whole life in it. First child when we had was still there in the cult. And then when I was 31, our generation really started like pushing back on a lot of the normal questions that we pushed back our whole life. And we had, like, my family was always very rebellious. Like, my parents did terrible things like take us to Disneyland and let us wear sweatpants at home and, terrible things. So there was enough, just terrible. I mean, going to hell. So there was enough families that kind of started getting sick of things that they turned into, like these rebellious families as well. And then our generation really started pushing back. Like, this is ridiculous. You're not giving us clear answers. You're just basically saying, don't ask. Because they don't want to give us answers. They don't want the pushback because they don't really have answers. It's silliness. So enough people started like this kind of movement that the leadership really was losing control. And it happened across the country because you had men, a lot of men too, like my dad's age, were connecting and saying like, I don't agree with this. Where are you at? And they'd be like, yeah, no, I don't either. And so all these people are realizing like, oh, there's more of us that don't believe this. There's more of us that are done with this. And so it ended up being kind of like a mass exodus where a lot of people, it like dissolved. So we never got officially marked. We still kind of were like, oh, I wish I had that official like marking letter because they're so hilarious.
Yeah.
So we never got officially marked, but it literally like dissolved. And so in our area, there was, I don't know, maybe like a group of 20, like maybe 3 families left. And that didn't work because you have like cousins hanging out, but no, like it was awful. So they all moved down. There's a group. So what's left, all that to say, is there's a group in LA, in Los Angeles area in California that's left. Pretty small group. And then there's a group in Texas that is left, and it is now led by the son of the one who ran it when I was there. The one who ran it when I was there is now just kind of like laying low and not doing much of anything. He does like online meetings and posts them, and it's hilarious because it's like it has a name now. And I'm like, wait, that was like a huge thing. We couldn't have a name. And so it's kind of funny. But his son is, it just makes my stomach when I listen to some of his stuff that we covertly have access to. So it's pretty, it's sad. I mean, I laugh about it because I'm like, yay, it's falling apart. Because every time you like see something, it's like, oh, it's so much smaller. Oh, it's so much smaller. But it's sad. Like, I just feel bad for the families that are left. My husband's parents are still there. And so that's hard. We're not super close, so it's not really hard for me. I just feel bad for my husband, and I feel bad for my kids that their grandparents put that over us as a family. Yeah. So it's sad, and they're retired and they travel around in a motorhome. So they'll go, there is a small group in San Luis still. They'll travel around the country to where all the little tiny groups are left. But we're always second. It's like, oh, well, we're going to go to a camp in San Luis. So then hopefully we'll have time to come see you. And it's like, yeah, whatever. Like, whatever. Obviously, we don't mean enough that you would come see your grandkids before the camp. So it's pretty sad. But that's what they've chosen. And we welcome them. Like, whenever they do come to town, we go out to dinner and we do something with them. But it's just sad. It's like the grandkids don't know them. And at this point, my kids are old enough, all their grandkids are old enough at this point that they're never going to have real relationships with them. So yeah, it's pretty sad.
That is sad. But, it's like you had your exit ramp.
Yep.
Right. And you had to prioritize your life. And I mean, I got to ask you this though. What was your state of mind coming out of this? Because you were there through the time you were 31 years old. How do you kind of deprogram yourself at this point?
It was really challenging. And it's interesting to look back because when we left, it was kind of just like, it was like a fog. Like there's lots of things about those couple of years that is just kind of like, I think I just disassociate from. But it was such a challenge because we were told and taught for our whole lives that, all churches were bad. Pretty much everyone else in the world is wrong and bad. So as we branched out. Like my husband had a job where he was meeting other people, and he met like this one guy kind of our age, and him and his wife wanted to like hang out. That was so weird because it's like, we don't just meet someone and then you just hang out with them. Like, what? And so it was really strange to start like having relationships like that. And then I remember my son was about 4, and I had someone had asked me, oh, you should sign him up for like a VBS, like the Bible summer like Bible school programs for kids. And I'm just like, hello, do you know how bad churches are? And so it was like little things like that, though, that would happen that I would, finally sign him up one summer. And I was like, oh my gosh, he had so much fun. And I met some amazing people. And okay, maybe everyone in the world is not terrible. And it kind of was a very slow transition. And also, we had no knowledge of what kind of group we had been a part of. We just thought it was a kind of different church, right? And so now we have the language to say, like, we were brainwashed, we were in a cult, and the trauma that we experienced, the spiritual and religious trauma, is real, that we experienced and that we made it through. And so back then, we didn't have that. We didn't reach out to therapists. Therapists were terrible. You don't tell people you have problems. Everything's great. And so all these things that have been, basically programmed into your mind, it took a long time. It probably took me 6 years until I went to my first therapy appointment. And that was crazy. And that was the first time, and I still love her today, that I was kind of talking to her about what I was struggling with or whatever and explaining like my story. And she was like, oh, okay, so you were in a cult? And I'm like, no. No, it was just, this little group, like cool people, really weird people hanging out. And she's like, yeah, no, that's a cult. And so that triggered me to kind of be more aware of what kind of group it was. But it was still tough. Even like within our marriage, like we were raised a certain way. The women were very lowly. We didn't have jobs or control over anything. Basically, you stayed home and did the wash, raised the kids, and cooked dinner. And so it took us a long time to transition from that to realize, like, why am I sitting at home when I could have a job helping us support our household? Like, this makes no sense. So it kind of was a slow unravel and learning. And then honestly, for me, it's been since pretty much since COVID. So the last several years when I've really have realized the damage that it's caused, because I had basically like a mental breakdown during COVID and kind of was just thinking, oh, it's just because we're stuck at home and I don't do homeschool with my kids. My kids are pretty challenging. So I kind of was just thinking that was my problem and why I was, having a rough time. And part of it, of course, was that. And then realizing once I started going to therapy regularly that, oh no, like I have a lot of PTSD. I have a lot of trauma from my childhood and adulthood that has never been taken care of. So it's pretty much been the last several years where I've taken care of the real problems. And it's tough. And I see a lot of my friends that also had gotten out the same time as me that have done nothing as far as the hard work it takes to kind of deprogram. And I feel like they're kind of stuck, which I was for a long time too. And so I am thankful for where I'm at now, but also it's so much freaking work that I get why people try like push it down and ignore it, because it's so much work to like heal. It's a lot of work.
Well, I'm really proud of you for going to therapy because that's something that we talk about a lot, getting coaching, getting therapy. You've got to, you're only as good as you are inside. And I'm just kind of curious what drove you to finally seek help.
Well, when it was very serious, even before COVID, I had gotten some help, but it was more sporadic on and off. But a lot of it came down to our marriage. We started having a lot of issues in our marriage. And a couple of our children are really challenging. And so that takes a toll, the parenting role on both of us, it did, which then in turn didn't help the marriage either. And so we kind of got to a place in our marriage during COVID where it was, which I'm sure a lot of people did during COVID, where it was like, okay, we have to really, really do something here or we're done. Like, this isn't going to work. And I mean, honestly, most of my friends are divorced from our group, rightfully so. And again, we've had to put in really, really, really hard work to stay where we're at now. And we're at the place now where we're happier than we've ever been as far as our marriage. And it's awesome. And I'm very grateful for it. Yeah. But it took literally a mental breakdown for me to understand that I need more than like every once in a while I have a bad day and I call the therapist to get an appointment. And I was very unhealthy. I ended up going on I'm still on medication. I actually just last month had to add to my medication ritual. But, understanding that it's okay to need help because we were raised where you're fine. You stuff your feelings. All of our relationships, like people will say, oh, you must have been so close to these people because you all were together all the time. And it was the opposite. All the relationships were so superficial because you couldn't trust anyone. And you didn't know who was going to like say something about you. Like, so Shannon told me and get you in trouble. And so we literally, like, looking back, all we did was like gossip. And yet that was like spoke from the platform, no gossiping. And that's all we did. We sat around, we ate food, and we talked and about the weather. Like, it was so sad. None of my relationships from the people I left do I miss, where I'm just like, oh, I mean, there's certain people that's like, oh, I wish I could see them more often. But none of my relationships were deep enough to where like we stay. Well, I have two friends that I stay in touch with that we're still friends. But other than that, it's not like, oh, I had these mentors, older women that I looked up to. Absolutely not. Like, very, very sad, very superficial. So yeah, it took a while to realize like how much damage that did. And like, oh, I do need real help because stuffing the feelings and not talking about this stuff. And now obviously I'm a talker. And I like, it's so therapeutic to talk now. And I encourage people to do it because, and it's not for everyone, but it's so therapeutic for me and I love it. It's great.
Are you able to form bonds with people now?
Yes. And yes. Yeah. And that has been, oh my gosh, that has been one of the most amazing experiences. Again, because I didn't understand what true friendship was. And like, I would call her one of my best friends. She lives right up the street from me. I just worked out with her this morning. We kind of connected maybe a year or two before COVID and hit it off. And like, our backgrounds are completely different. Our beliefs are completely different. And so, the old me is saying like, yeah, she's nice, but this can't work. And it's like, we do everything together. Like, we're going on family trips with them this summer. Like, we're such good friends with them. And I absolutely, I don't know. I'm still in awe of it because it's like, oh, weird. Okay, so this is what a true friendship is. I can trust you with really hard things and know you're not going to go tattle on me or even gossip or tell someone else when I say, hey, I don't want you to repeat this. I know it's not going to get repeated. It's amazing. Like, it's honestly like still like I'm in awe of how awesome it is to have a relationship like that.
I never asked you how old you are now.
I'm 43.
Okay, so you're 43 years old and you're really discovering life.
Yeah, truly.
It's really kind of a cool thing to go through this now and really appreciate it. Whereas, when we're kids, we may not necessarily appreciate that depth of a relationship. How about your siblings? How you doing with them? Yeah, good now. Of course, now we're all out, thankfully. And so, yeah, I have really good relationships with my sisters. One lives in Florida now, and then one lives down on the coast, about 6 hours from me. So I don't get to see either one of them very much, but we're very close. We always get together for Christmas now, and they both used to live up closer to me. And when they were here, we were together a lot. But super close, love them to death, love all my nieces and nephews. And like, it's really fun to see
all of my nieces and nephews and my kids, their bonds that they have together. It's so fun to see that with them growing up. I love it. I love it.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Speaking of kids, you did struggle with infertility, but you have kids now. So
Yes.
what transpired there?
So we went through infertility when we were in the cult. And that was that's like where a lot of my trauma comes from. But that was a huge deal because I felt like I was being punished by God for doing something wrong, which I wasn't sure what I did wrong, but for not having babies, because that was our job to have kids. And so we went through about 3 years of infertility, very stressful. I mean, in normal circumstances, it's one of the worst things I think a person can have to deal with. And then in our situation, it was just that much more with just the discomfort of like, it was just weird. It was just I felt very unsupported, and like people would just talk about me, but no one really knew. It was just very weird. It was awful, but we were never able to get pregnant. And so then we decided to adopt. My husband was ready a lot sooner to adopt than I was, because I just knew I would get pregnant. I knew the next time it's going to happen, because we were young and healthy. And I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. So, but he was done with me being on hormones, I think, and being a crazy person, because I literally was. And so anyway, then we looked into adoption. It was so much different back then. My son is 16 now. So, 18 years ago when we started thinking about it, much different world than what's out there now as far as resources and just the knowledge that all of us have, I think, in general. But his adoption story is kind of a long story that we probably don't have time for. But he was a month old when he came to join our family. And it was a very traumatic and awful experience, but turned out great. Finalized adoption, he was 9 months old when we finalized adoption, and we could breathe, and it was good. And then after that, we had moved. We thought we were going to move to Southern California, so we didn't try to adopt again for a while. And then we ended up staying here. So we're like, okay, let's try again. Well, it's very, very expensive if you do private or agency adoption. Back then, it was like $25,000. And
oh my God.
Yeah, and this is after we just spent $50,000 on infertility. And the only way we could ever afford that was because my husband's a contractor and he had done a spec house with his parents, and we spent every single cent on infertility.
Oh,
so then for the adoption, we had to get a loan for it. And we're just young kids. We have no clue what we're doing. So we did that. And then years later, we're like, we don't have the money to do that again. We don't, but we do want to grow our family. So we started looking into the foster system and what we could do there. So we ended up getting certified as foster parents and went down that direction. And I really, in my mind, I had a lot of plans in my mind as, a young kid that I want 2 kids. I would like a boy first and then a girl, and then we're done. And we don't have to have a giant car and blah, blah, blah. Everything's cheaper because you just have to buy 2 things instead of 1 million. So I had it all planned out. And then we got into the foster agency and certified. And so it's a very interesting process, and that could be a whole nother story too. But basically, you're given these profiles of children, and a lot of it's very little information, and they're like, yes or no. And then they throw you in this pool of, whatever family said yes, and then the social workers go through it and pick from there. So while we were doing that, we did respite care, which is kind of like when you're certified as a foster parent, you can babysit basically other foster kiddos to give other foster parents a break, or if, whatever it might be. So we did that for a while. So we had a lot of different kiddos through our home. And I enjoyed that. Your heart just breaks for these kids and, what they're experiencing. And it opened me up to a completely different world. And then I started discovering, because my social worker kept sending me these profiles, and I'm like, it's 2 kids though, or it's 3 kids. Why are you sending this to me? Because there's so many sibling sets. And so it really, really opened me up to okay, pro and con list. All the con list is very, very greedy things, why I'm saying no. And you have to be realistic with it. It's not easy. But we started opening ourselves up okay, we could handle more kids. We could do this. And then to our son, we have an open relationship with a lot of his birth family. And I started realizing as we went through the foster system, there's a very high likelihood we will not have a relationship with this child's birth family, most likely. So I was like, well, if they had a birth sibling, at least they always have that one birth connection, because I would feel bad. So those were kind of my thoughts. And then we got our girls, and it was like a whirlwind again, a whole nother story of how we got them. But it was literally like July 7th, we got called. We had them on July 11th. It was like super fast. We didn't ever see pictures of them. Like, we said yes, and we just showed up. It was crazy. Such a crazy experience.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
And you had to prepare in 4 days. Yeah.
So it was a lot. And even going through all that, the foster parenting, even before we got the girls, we had some other sibling sets in our home that didn't work out. And that was like devastating. And even now I'll tell my husband, I think, as the kids get older, maybe we should foster. He's like, no, I can't watch you go through that again. That was awful.
Yeah.
It's
like,
hard.
Okay, let's, we can move on to the next chapter.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But it was great. And, and we have our 3 kids. At the time, Dakota, my son, was 7. So I went from an only child for 7 years and then added 2 to the pile. And when we got the girls, Charlie was 14 months old and Zoe was 2.5. So it was busy in our household. And yeah, I joke about it all the time, but I'm like, I'm not sure I've recovered from that yet. Like,
we're still... it may be a while, just let me tell you, because then they get bigger. And as I say, bigger kids, bigger problems.
Yes.
But yeah, well,
I'm seeing that already.
Topic for another show.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, I do want to touch on this because this is super important. Yeah, I think you're hilarious, which is why I started following you in the first place.
Oh,
we all like to laugh during our day.
Mm-hmm.
When did you discover or find out that, first of all, you were funny and that humor was going to be so therapeutic for you?
Mm-hmm. So I think I always was a funny person. My mom always was. But it got squelched so much in my growing up experiences. Anytime I would do something funny, I feel like I'd get in trouble for it or just get tapped down for it. So as I, got out of that, I opened myself up to being funnier little by little. I had an Instagram account that I would just share with friends and do stupid little things to make them laugh. And it was just no big deal. And then during COVID, is when, everyone in the world started doing TikToks. And I started with my kids, hey, we're all home. Let's do some TikToks. What's this thing? So we started doing that. And then at the same time, I kind of had an Instagram and YouTube and just all my accounts kind of small, but just playing around with them. And then I had a couple of videos go viral. And for sure, the one is the bento box one where I'm pretending to I'm packing a lunch for my kid versus the beautiful bento box. And that one, that one was a good one that went viral. And definitely a lot of people found me from that because I'll get people, if I repost it, I'll get comments that will be like, oh my gosh, this is the one that I found you on. And I'm like, oh, yay. So I had a couple different videos go viral though. And then it just blew up into all these followers, and I ended up being on, now I'm friends with them, but our local TV station here, I was on the show a couple of times with them, and then I got to go and be on the Kelly Clarkson show twice before she moved to New York. Yes, so during COVID, they did a virtual one, so we got to do a virtual, so I was a part of the virtual during COVID, Kelly Clarkson. And then when things opened up, they wanted to do an in-studio one with people that they had done virtual ones with. So that was such a fun experience. And
I love her.
Oh, I just love her. I love her. It was so much fun. And then, and then my accounts got hacked last year and I had to start all over.
With that?
It was so awful. So awful. And my Facebook account is still hacked. They still are collecting all my monies and they post every hour. It's awful. And Facebook doesn't care. So they basically, one of those things, you get an email, clicked on it, and it was I was in a hurry, and I know better. I get this kind of junk mail all the time with being so public. And I was rushing out the door with the kids on the way to school, email popped up. I'm like, oh, that's weird. I click on it, and it was a hacker. And instantly, they took over because Facebook and Instagram are connected. Both accounts completely gone, and they run it still. So in April, I think I started a new one, and it's going well. Like, I'm not Facebook. The Facebook one hasn't grown at all, but my Instagram one is where I spend most of the time, and it's fine. So, but it was awful. Like, I hit a really hard low. It was weird how much it affected me, but
yeah, because you put so much work into that. I don't know if people understand, and certainly I don't go to the level that you do, but just the editing and the take after take after take, get it right, and particularly if you're a perfectionist like I am.
I've had to learn not to be.
Yeah, I know. Well, and that's what I love about you, because you are so self-deprecating.
Yes.
I want everybody to check you out though on your Instagram, because if you just want a good laugh and just it's good, clean fun, and it's great. And then you started your podcast,
yes,
which I really want to talk about. And I know some of it's been kind of therapeutic for you, but who is your target audience? Like, who do you think your show's for?
So this season, I am focusing more on coercive control and cult relationships. So I've been interviewing a lot of people that have just come from cult backgrounds. A couple are just different, like I said, like cultic relationships, which can just be like controlling relationships. I just call it cultic because it's so similar. So that's kind of where I am this season. So I would say my target audience is anyone that either has come out of a religious or cult situation or experience, or maybe still is in one and is wondering, like, well, you're talking about religion and cults. What's the difference? Because my main aim with my podcast is to give people a platform to share their story, because it was so therapeutic. What started it is I started getting asked to be on a lot of different podcasts, a couple years ago. And it was feeling so good. I'm like, oh my gosh, someone wants to hear about my story. And it was very therapeutic for me. So I'm like, I need to do this too. So it's, and I don't plan on, I don't know what will ever come of the podcast. It's not like it's crazy big or anything, but I love just giving that platform for people to share their stories. And then going back in the previous seasons, it's kind of been a mix. When I started, it was kind of like, okay, any way that I could connect someone to part of my story, I'm interviewing them. So it left me a lot of openings, which is fun. Like Foster Dad Flipper on Instagram and on all the social medias is amazing foster dad. I did an interview with him. His story is incredible. And so just stories like that in some way connect with me. Mm-hmm. So it's been, I have talked to some of the most amazing people. It just like blows my mind how exciting and just you learn so much. Like, we're all humans,
Yeah.
You think people are this perfect something on social media, and then you sit down and talk with them and it's like, oh, they're just normal like me. So it's pretty cool.
I have made some incredible friendships from doing this podcast. It would be hard for me to stop now, because it is just the being able to and then I connect other people to other podcasters, and it's just a really cool community of people. So
it really
I think you're feeling that too.
Yeah.
You're writing a memoir.
So kind of.
Okay.
I've been kind of writing it for about 3 years now. And every time I've taken like a full year break at this point. And I'm not sure when I'm going to pick it back up. It's definitely going to happen. But I kept hitting like major mental roadblocks where I'm like, okay, it's been good, because then I'm like, okay, this is where I need to focus my therapy, because I'm really struggling with this that I'm writing about. So it's been a very interesting experience. And I'm glad that I started it when I did, because, again, it's giving me opportunities to kind of like pivot and adjust my therapy sessions and work on stuff that maybe originally I didn't think I needed to. So, so it'll happen, but it's not happening anytime real soon.
I ask all my guests this. So I would love to know one of your pillars of self-care. What's something that you do for yourself that's important?
I take time alone by myself. I'm a very social, talkative person, but I'm also like a big old introvert, and I just want to be left alone. So we have started this probably like 6 years ago, where I will We're about 2 hours from Reno, and so Nevada. So I'll drive to Reno, Nevada, get free rooms at the casinos up there, and I will literally stay in my room for 3 days, just journaling, writing, podcasts, whatever I feel like doing. And there are some times that I go and I literally don't ever leave the room. I order food and I don't leave the room. Like, I love it. And that is like turned out to be like my favorite, like, self-care thing as far as like really going and do something. Little things at home, obviously, like I like to just sit and meditate and be quiet. I love to go get a pedicure. But and part of it is just putting it into practice. There are all these things I like, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I haven't done that for a while. But I definitely have learned how important it is. Like, oh my gosh, I always used to like think that's so silly. Like, oh, what are these weak people needing self-care? And I'm like, oh, that's me. I need it.
Well, your trips to Reno are kind of like mom camp.
It is. It's the best. It's the best thing ever.
Oh, good for you.
Love it. Yeah, I love it.
Do what it takes. All right, Shannon, where can people find you?
All right, you can find me at shannonpantshow.com, and on there will be all my handles to everywhere. I hang out mostly on Instagram at The Real Shanny Pants and on YouTube, The Shanny Pants Show. So those are kind of my main hangouts. My podcast is The Shanny Pants Show as well. So yeah, go give me a review and like me and all those things for the podcasting world too. But I love it. I love it all, and I love connecting with people. I think, I try to respond to every single message I get, and I just think it's, social media is so bad in so many ways, but then it's super cool too, connecting with people.
Absolutely. And I'll put all of that in the show notes. So if anyone wants to reach out to you, they can do that.
Awesome.
Shannon Payton, this was delightful. Thank you so much for being here today.
Of course. I really appreciate you having me. Thank you so much.
Follow Asking for a Friend on social media outlets and provide a review and share this show wherever you get your podcasts. Reviews and sharing help us grow.